Number 1. ANDREI CHIKATILO, often referred to as the Butcher of Rostov, was one of the most gruesome and terrifying serial killers in Soviet history. Born in 1936 in Ukraine during a time of famine, his early life was shaped by severe poverty, hunger, and traumatic experiences. Rumors circulated that his older brother had been kidnapped and eaten by starving neighbors, and his father was labeled a coward after being captured during World War II. These early psychological wounds may have planted the seeds of the brutal violence he would later commit. Chikatilo struggled with impotence and deep social awkwardness, often being bullied and rejected by women. These frustrations grew into resentment and rage, and by the late 1970s, he began targeting vulnerable individuals, mostly children and young women. His method was particularly disturbing. He would lure victims to isolated areas like forests or abandoned buildings by pretending to be helpful or friendly. Once they were alone, he would attack them with savage violence, often stabbing them dozens of times, mutilating their bodies, and engaging in cannibalism or necrophilia. His killings were driven by a twisted mix of sexual gratification and power, as he found pleasure in dominating and destroying the helpless. Between 1978 and 1990, Chikatilo murdered at least 52 people across several regions of the Soviet Union. He evaded capture for years due to flaws in the Soviet criminal justice system, including reluctance to admit that a serial killer could exist under communist rule. Investigators were overwhelmed by the scale and randomness of the crimes, and dozens of innocent people were wrongfully arrested. In fact, another man was even executed for one of Chikatilo's murders. It wasn't until forensic evidence and undercover surveillance linked him to a pattern of killings that he was finally arrested in 1990. Once in custody, Chikatilo confessed in chilling detail to his crimes, showing little remorse. His trial in 1992 was highly publicized and shocking. He often disrupted the proceedings, shouting and exposing himself in court. Psychiatrists deemed him sane, and he was found guilty on 52 counts of murder. The court sentenced him to death. In 1994, ANDREI Chikatilo was executed by a single gunshot to the back of the head. His case sent shockwaves through Russia and the world, revealing both the terrifying depths of human depravity and the critical failures in law enforcement that allowed such a killer to operate for over a decade. Today, Chikatilo's legacy stands as a grim reminder of the damage one man can do when hidden behind bureaucracy, fear, and denial. His story is still studied in criminal psychology and forensic science courses, not just for its horror, but for the lessons it teaches in identifying and stopping predators. Number 2. Harold Shipman, often known as Dr. Death, was a trusted physician in the UK whose case shocked the nation and led to major healthcare reforms. Born in 1946 in Nottingham, England, Shipman followed a traditional path to becoming a general practitioner. He graduated from Leeds School of Medicine and built a reputation as a dependable family doctor. Patients and colleagues saw him as calm, competent, and dedicated. However, behind that professional image was a disturbing reality. Over 2 decades, Shipman was connected to a large number of patient deaths, mostly elderly women. He would visit them at home or see them in his clinic and administer powerful medication normally used for severe pain. These deaths were often recorded as natural, and due to his trusted position, no one questioned them for years. Everything changed with the death of one patient, Kathleen Grundy. She was 81, healthy and active. After she passed, a new will surfaced that left everything to Shipman. Her daughter, a lawyer, grew suspicious and reported it. When an autopsy was done, it revealed medication in her system that didn't match her medical records. This discovery led authorities to start looking more closely at Shipman's past. Investigators began to find patterns, similar causes of death, quick cremations, and unusual paperwork. Eventually, Shipman was arrested and put on trial. In 2000, he was found guilty of multiple counts and sentenced to life in prison. A public investigation later suggested the number of lives lost could be over 200. He never admitted to any more wrongdoing. Psychologists believed he may have felt he had the power to make serious decisions about others' lives. Some thought he was drawn to the control and secrecy, but his true motivations remain unknown. In 2004, Shipman was found unresponsive in his prison cell. With that, the full truth was never uncovered. His actions had a lasting impact. The case led to a nationwide inquiry called the Shipman Inquiry. It uncovered weaknesses in how deaths were certified and how prescriptions were tracked. As a result, the UK introduced major changes in how doctors are monitored and how patients are protected. Harold Shipman's story is one of lost trust and missed warning signs, but it also led to important reforms that aim to make the medical system safer and more accountable for everyone. Number 3. Albert Fish, known by names like the Gray Man, the Boogeyman, and the Brooklyn Vampire, remains one of the most unsettling figures in American criminal history. Born in 1870 in Washington, D.C., his life was shaped by mental illness, early trauma, and disturbing tendencies that emerged over time. Outwardly, Fish seemed like a quiet, elderly man. But beneath that calm appearance was a complex and troubled individual hiding a lifetime of secrets. Fish's childhood was marked by instability. After his father died, his mother placed him in an orphanage due to financial hardship. There, he endured harsh treatment that left lasting psychological scars. As he grew older, Fish began associating pain with a sense of personal meaning, a belief that would influence his behavior for the rest of his life. As an adult, Fish appeared to live a relatively normal life. He worked as a painter, had children, and attended church regularly. But behind closed doors, he struggled with dark thoughts and engaged in behaviors that alarmed even experienced doctors later in life. He claimed to have received visions or spiritual messages that encouraged him to act on his impulses. These inner beliefs drove much of what came next. Between the 1920s and 1930s, Fish targeted vulnerable children, often from working-class neighborhoods. He would approach families using false names and stories, offering gifts, jobs, or invitations. Once he had earned their trust, he would lure the children away, often with tragic consequences. These crimes shocked entire communities, but his careful methods allowed him to go undetected for years. The most well-known case tied to Fish involved a young girl he met during a visit to a family in New York. He initially claimed to be there to help their son find work, but after meeting the daughter, he shifted his focus. He told the family he was taking her to a birthday party. Sadly, she never returned home. Years later, in 1934, the girl's family received a disturbing anonymous letter. While much of the content was deeply unsettling, it gave investigators the lead they needed. They traced the letter to a boarding house where Fish had stayed under a false name. This led to his arrest. During questioning, Fish calmly spoke about his past. He admitted to harming children in multiple states, though only a handful of cases were officially confirmed. His lack of emotion and the disturbing details of his confessions stunned even seasoned detectives. At trial, Fish's defense team argued that he was mentally unwell, pointing to his strange behavior. and lifelong psychological struggles. Despite this, the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to death. On January 16, 1936, Fish was executed by electric chair at Sing Sing prison. There were rumors that the first jolt didn't work due to the condition of his body, requiring a second attempt. His final words were, "I don't even know why I'm here." Albert Fish's case remains a chilling example of hidden danger. He looked like an ordinary man, but behind that image was a story that continues to haunt experts and the public alike. His legacy is one of sorrow, caution, and a reminder of how appearances can deceive even the most watchful eyes. Number 4. Gary Ridgway, infamously known as the Green River Killer, was one of the most prolific serial offenders in American history. Born in 1949 in Salt Lake City, Utah, Ridgway grew up in a troubled home marked by instability and emotional conflict. He struggled in school, particularly with reading, and was known to be quiet and withdrawn. His childhood was shaped by a strict and sometimes volatile environment, with complicated relationships that would influence his later behavior. From the outside, Ridgway led a seemingly normal life. He served in the Navy, worked for decades as a truck painter, married multiple times, and was described by neighbors and coworkers as polite and dependable. But beneath this exterior was a deeply hidden pattern of behavior that spanned nearly 2 decades before it was fully uncovered. Beginning in the early 1980s, a series of disappearances and unexplained deaths began to surface in the Seattle and Tacoma areas of Washington state. Many of the victims were young women or teenagers, often from vulnerable backgrounds. Ridgway would often meet them in public areas and offer them assistance or rides. He targeted individuals who were unlikely to be immediately missed, which helped him avoid detection for years. He would then lead them to isolated areas where his crimes took place. The remains of the victims were often found near the Green River, leading to the nickname that would later define the investigation. As the number of cases grew, law enforcement launched one of the most extensive investigations in U.S. history. Despite numerous suspects and leads, the case remained unsolved for nearly 2 decades. Ridgway managed to avoid suspicion for years, in part because of his unassuming demeanor and careful methods. In 2001, advances in forensic science finally provided a breakthrough. DNA evidence linked Ridgway to several of the victims. When he was arrested and questioned, he eventually admitted to his role in the crimes. In a calm and emotionless tone, Ridgway spoke about his actions, often showing little to no remorse. His admissions shocked even seasoned investigators. He later cooperated with authorities, helping them locate additional victims and describing the details of his past behavior. In total, Ridgway was convicted of 49 murders, though he later claimed his count was even higher. As part of a plea agreement to avoid the death penalty, he agreed to provide information that helped bring closure to many families. In 2003, Gary Ridgway was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He is currently serving his sentence at Washington State Penitentiary. His story remains one of the most haunting in modern criminal history, not only because of the number of victims, but also due to the contrast between his quiet public life and the hidden reality of his actions. Ridgway's case led to improved forensic procedures and raised important discussions about how offenders can blend into everyday life. His name is now remembered not just for the scale of his crimes, but for how long he evaded justice and how vital it is to listen to the voices of those who often go unheard. Number 5. Dennis Rader, known as the BTK Killer, shocked the world when his true identity was uncovered in 2005. For decades, he had lived a seemingly normal life in Wichita, Kansas. Born in 1945, Rader grew up in a working-class family. He was described as quiet, polite, and responsible. From the outside, he appeared to be a model citizen. He served in the Air Force, held a steady job, got married, had 2 children, and even served as president of his local church council. But beneath that calm exterior, Rader was hiding a deeply troubling secret. His nickname, BTK, stood for Bind, Torture, Kill, a phrase he used to describe his own method of operation. Between 1974 and 1991, Rader committed a series of attacks that left law enforcement baffled. His first known case involved an entire family, and it shocked the Wichita community to its core. Over time, he continued to target individuals, often watching them for days or weeks beforehand. What made Rader even more unusual was how he communicated with police and the media. He sent letters describing what he had done, often including disturbing details that only the person responsible could know. These messages gave him a sense of control and kept public fear alive. Yet after 1991, the messages and crimes stopped. For more than a decade, the BTK case went cold. Many began to believe he had either passed away or moved far away. Then in 2004, after years of silence, new letters began arriving. Rader couldn't resist the urge to communicate again. One of his messages included a floppy disk, which police were able to trace back to a local church. They found metadata linking the file to Dennis Rader. Within days, he was under surveillance. When arrested in 2005, he confessed almost immediately. Investigators and the public were stunned. The man who had haunted the city for so long turned out to be a friendly neighbor, a father, and a respected community figure. In his confession, Rader calmly described what he had done, showing little emotion. He explained that he had developed these thoughts from a young age and that acting on them gave him a sense of power and control. During the trial, he pled guilty to 10 confirmed counts. The courtroom listened in shock as he recounted each case with chilling precision. He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms with no chance of parole. He is now serving his sentence in a maximum security prison in Kansas. Rader's case is often studied in criminal psychology due to his double life and calculated behavior. His story has raised many questions about how someone can hide so much darkness while living a completely ordinary life. The case led to improvements in forensic technology and digital tracking, tools that ultimately helped bring him to justice. Today, the name Dennis Rader reminds us that appearances can be deceiving. Behind a calm smile can lie hidden dangers. His story continues to teach investigators, psychologists, and the public about the importance of vigilance, understanding mental health, and the unpredictable nature of human behavior. Number 6. Charles Manson was not your typical criminal. Born in 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio, his life began in chaos. His mother was just 16 when he was born, and much of his early childhood was spent in and out of relatives' homes and reform schools. By the time he reached adulthood, Manson had already spent half his life in institutions. But it wasn't until the late 1960s that the world would come to know his name in connection with a series of events that shocked America. In California, during a time of cultural upheaval, Manson created a group of devoted followers who called themselves the Family. He convinced them he was a spiritual leader, a prophet of sorts, preaching about an upcoming apocalyptic race war he referred to as Helter Skelter, a phrase he borrowed from a Beatles song. Manson didn't physically commit the infamous crimes himself. Instead, he manipulated and ordered his followers to carry out violent acts on his behalf. He used fear, mind control, and drugs to keep his group loyal. In August 1969, members of the family committed 2 brutal attacks over 2 nights. Their most high-profile victim was actress Sharon Tate, who was 8 months pregnant. Manson's followers entered her home and, along with 4 others inside, ended their lives in what authorities would later describe as ritualistic and horrifying scenes. The next night, they did it again at a different house, claiming more victims. What made Manson particularly terrifying was how he managed to control others so completely that they believed they were doing something righteous. He told them these crimes would spark a war that he and his family would survive by hiding in the desert until the chaos passed. Once civilization collapsed, he claimed, they would emerge as leaders. Manson's trial in 1970 was one of the most watched in history. He and his followers shocked the courtroom with strange behavior, singing, carved symbols into their foreheads, and showing no remorse. Manson carved an X into his own forehead, which he later altered into a swastika. He often claimed he never told anyone to hurt anybody, but recordings, testimonies, and actions told a different story. In the end, Manson and several of his key followers were sentenced to death. However, when California temporarily outlawed the death penalty, their sentences were changed to life imprisonment. Manson remained in prison for the rest of his life, often making headlines with disturbing interviews and strange statements. He died in 2017 at the age of 83 from natural causes. To this day, Charles Manson remains a haunting example of how one person, without ever directly committing violence, could influence others to commit unthinkable acts. His case continues to be studied by psychologists, criminologists, and historians as a disturbing symbol of manipulation, control, and the darker sides of human psychology. Number 7. Ed Gein, often called the Butcher of Plainfield, was one of the most bizarre figures in American criminal history. Born in 1906 in Wisconsin, Ed grew up in extreme isolation under the rule of his deeply religious and controlling mother. She taught him that all women, except herself, were sinful and dangerous. After his father died and his older brother mysteriously passed away, Ed was left alone with his mother until her death in 1945. Her loss devastated him, triggering a downward spiral that led to strange and troubling behavior. Ed began living in a world of his own, sealing off rooms in his house as shrines to his mother and filling the rest with clutter and decay. He became obsessed with anatomy and death, often visiting local cemeteries at night. He admitted to exhuming recently buried bodies, taking items and remains back to his home. What shocked authorities most was how he used those remains, crafting household objects, clothing, and masks. These acts weren't driven by hatred or aggression, but by a twisted longing to recreate his mother and become closer to her memory. In 1957, police were investigating the disappearance of a local hardware store owner named Bernice Warden. They traced the case to GEIN and searched his farmhouse. What they discovered was beyond imagination. Human remains repurposed in macabre ways, including furniture and decorations made from body parts. Though rumors exaggerated some of the findings, the reality was disturbing enough. Ed eventually confessed to killing 2 women and robbing multiple graves. He was declared unfit for trial at first and spent years in a psychiatric hospital. When he was finally deemed competent, he stood trial for 1 murder and was found guilty but insane. He was returned to a state hospital where he lived quietly until his death in 1984 from cancer. Ed Gein's story had a massive influence on popular culture. He inspired numerous fictional characters, including Norman Bates in Psycho, Leatherface in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. While he wasn't a serial killer in the traditional sense, only 2 confirmed murders, his case horrified and fascinated the public. GEIN remains a symbol of how unresolved trauma and isolation can lead to deeply troubling behavior. His life and crimes raised major questions about mental health, abuse, and the thin line between grief and madness. Number 8. David Berkowitz, also known as the Son of Sam, terrorized New York City during the summer of 1976. Born Richard David Falco in 1953, he was adopted and raised in the Bronx as David Berkowitz. From an early age, Berkowitz struggled with feelings of abandonment, isolation, and deep-seated rage. These emotional struggles intensified over time, and by his 20s, they evolved into violent obsessions. Berkowitz worked various low-level jobs and lived a fairly ordinary life on the surface. But beneath that normal exterior, he was slipping into a dangerous mindset. Between 1976 and 1977, he carried out a series of late-night shootings across New York City, often targeting couples sitting in parked cars. He used a .44 caliber revolver, which later earned him the media nickname, the .44 caliber killer. The attacks seemed random, and each one left the city more frightened and confused. The killer left behind cryptic letters addressed to the police and journalists. In them, he referred to himself as Son of Sam, and claimed he was following orders from a demon who possessed his neighbor's dog. The bizarre details only added to the public hysteria. A massive manhunt ensued, and over 300 NYPD officers were assigned to the case. Public fear reached its peak, with people avoiding nighttime outings and even changing their hairstyles to avoid resembling previous victims. The breakthrough came in August 1977, when a parking ticket issued near the scene of one attack led investigators to Berkowitz's car. Inside, they found weapons and a letter. When officers arrested him outside his apartment, Berkowitz calmly said, "Well, you got me." During interrogation, he confessed to the shootings without resistance. He claimed the demon story was true, but psychologists soon determined he suffered from paranoid schizophrenia and delusional thinking. At trial, Berkowitz pleaded guilty to 6 murders and received 6 consecutive life sentences. He is still serving time in a maximum security prison in New York. In the years since his conviction, Berkowitz has undergone a transformation. He now identifies as a born-again Christian and refers to himself as the Son of Hope. He has expressed remorse and discourages others from glorifying his crimes. Though many doubt the sincerity of his conversion, he has stayed out of trouble behind bars. The Son of Sam case left a lasting mark on American criminal justice and media. New York passed the Son of Sam laws to prevent criminals from profiting off their notoriety. Berkowitz's story is still studied today for its mix of psychological disturbance, media frenzy, and public terror. Despite his quiet life now, his name remains one of the most chilling in true crime history. Number 9. Richard Speck was an American mass murderer whose name became infamous after a single night of terror in 1966. Born in 1941 in Kirkwood, Illinois, Speck had a troubled childhood shaped by instability, alcohol abuse, and brushes with the law. After his father died when he was 6, his mother remarried a man who was reportedly violent and a heavy drinker. Speck's behavior began to spiral during his teenage years. He dropped out of school in the 8th grade and racked up a long list of arrests for burglary, assault, and other petty crimes. He struggled to hold steady work, eventually becoming a seaman on the Great Lakes. By his mid-20s, he had become a drifter with a criminal record and a growing resentment toward society. On July 13, 1966, in Chicago, Speck broke into a townhouse that served as a dormitory for nursing students. Inside were 9 young women. Over the course of the night, Speck tied up the students, one by one. What followed was a sequence of tragic and terrifying events. 8 of the women were killed, while one, Corazon Amorao, survived by hiding under a bed. Her survival would later be crucial to bringing Speck to justice. After what happened, Speck went into hiding. He was later found and brought to a hospital where a doctor recognized a tattoo on his arm. That detail matched the description given by the only person who had survived. Soon after, Speck was taken into custody. His trial began in 1967 and gained a lot of public attention. Throughout the proceedings, Speck stayed quiet and showed little emotion. The survivor, Corazon Amorao, stood in court and identified him as the person responsible. Her words, along with the evidence presented, made the case strong. It took the jury less than an hour to reach their verdict. Speck was found guilty of all 8 murders and sentenced to death. However, in 1972, the U.S. Supreme Court temporarily struck down the death penalty, and Speck's sentence was commuted to life in prison. He spent the rest of his life behind bars. While imprisoned, Speck's behavior remained controversial. In the early 1990s, videos surfaced showing him using drugs and living in relative comfort in prison, sparking public outrage. He even spoke on camera about the crimes, showing no remorse. Richard Speck died of a heart attack in 1991. He was 49 years old. His case remains one of the most chilling mass murders in American history, and it led to changes in how dormitories and other residential facilities ensured safety. Speck's story is often cited as an example of how a single individual's actions can shatter lives and send lasting shockwaves through a community. Number 10. Robert HANSEN, often referred to as the Butcher Baker, was one of Alaska's most notorious serial killers. Born in 1939 in Estherville, Iowa, HANSEN's early life was marked by loneliness, bullying, and an unstable relationship with his strict father. He had a stutter and suffered from severe acne, which made him an easy target for ridicule by his peers. As a teenager, he grew increasingly isolated and began to harbor deep resentment toward women who rejected him. HANSEN's first run-ins with the law began in his youth. He was arrested for arson at age 19 after setting fire to a school bus garage. Although he served time in a juvenile facility, his criminal tendencies didn't end there. In public, HANSEN maintained the appearance of a quiet, hardworking man. He married twice, had children, and ran a successful bakery in Anchorage, Alaska. He was well liked in the community and even participated in local hunting competitions. But beneath this image of normalcy was a man living a disturbing double life. HANSEN had a deep obsession with hunting, but not just with animals. He began targeting women, specifically sex workers and dancers whom he believed no one would miss. Between 1971 and 1983, HANSEN abducted dozens of women from Anchorage, luring them with promises of money or safety. He would then take them to a remote cabin he owned in the Alaskan wilderness, over 35 miles away from the city. There, isolated in the dense woods, he would assault and torment his victims. In many cases, he released them into the wild, only to hunt them down with a rifle, turning the forest into a deadly game. His method was as calculated as it was brutal. Because of the remoteness of the location and the vulnerable status of his victims, HANSEN managed to elude law enforcement for over a decade. Many women simply vanished without a trace. However, in 1983, his reign of terror began to unravel. A 19-year-old victim named Cindy Paulson escaped from HANSEN's clutches. She was found running through the streets of Anchorage, handcuffed and barefoot, by a passing truck driver. She told police a horrifying story of being held in a basement, assaulted, and nearly flown to a remote cabin. Although HANSEN was initially questioned, his clean reputation led investigators to doubt Cindy's story. But one detective, Glenn Flotha of the Alaska State Troopers, refused to ignore the warning signs. As disappearances continued, he pushed for a closer look into HANSEN's activities. Meanwhile, investigators discovered that bodies had been turning up in the wilderness with alarming consistency. Forensic evidence and interviews with other sex workers began pointing in HANSEN's direction. Eventually, a warrant was issued to search HANSEN's home. What police found confirmed their worst fears. Hidden in the ceiling tiles was a stash of jewelry belonging to missing women. Even more disturbing was a hidden aviation map marked with X's, each one suspected to indicate a burial site. Many of these X's matched the locations where remains had been discovered. Faced with overwhelming evidence, HANSEN confessed. He admitted to killing at least 17 women and assaulting many more, although authorities suspect the actual number could be much higher. He recounted how he abducted his victims, transported them to the wilderness, and hunted them like animals. His confession shocked the nation and painted a chilling picture of a man who lived two lives, one as a respected baker, the other as a cold-blooded predator. In 1984, Robert HANSEN was sentenced to 461 years plus life without the possibility of parole. He was imprisoned at Spring Creek Correctional Center in Seward, Alaska, where he remained until his death in 2014 at the age of 75. His crimes had a lasting impact on Alaska, leading to increased safety measures for sex workers and improvements in how missing persons cases were handled. The psychological profile of HANSEN became a case study for law enforcement and criminal psychologists. His ability to hide in plain sight, live a seemingly normal life, and yet commit such horrific acts challenged traditional ideas about what a serial killer looks like. The case also emphasized the dangers faced by marginalized women and the importance of listening to survivors. Robert HANSEN's story is a chilling reminder of how evil can wear a mask of normalcy. Despite his outward appearance as a mild-mannered baker, he harbored a darkness that turned the Alaskan wilderness into a hunting ground for human lives. His crimes remain among the most disturbing in U.S. history, and his legacy serves as a somber warning that sometimes the most dangerous people are those no one suspects. Number 11. Jack Unterweger was a charming Austrian writer, journalist, and convicted killer whose double life shocked Europe. Born in 1950 in Austria to a troubled upbringing, his early life was marred by poverty, instability, and crime. His mother, a barmaid with criminal ties, left Jack in the care of a violent grandfather. He dropped out of school early and turned to theft, fraud, and assault. By the age of 24, he had already been convicted of murdering a young woman named Margaret Schaefer in 1974. He was sentenced to life in prison. But that wasn't the end of his story. It was only the beginning of one of the most bizarre and chilling criminal sagas in modern history. While in prison, Unterweger began writing poems, plays, and novels. His autobiography Purgatory became a bestseller in Austria, earning praise from literary elites who believed he had been rehabilitated. Intellectuals, politicians, and celebrities rallied for his release, arguing that his transformation was genuine. In 1990, after serving 15 years, he was granted parole. The justice system saw him as a poster child for reform. They couldn't have been more wrong. Shortly after his release, women began to disappear again, first in Austria, then in Czechoslovakia, and later the United States. The victims were mostly sex workers, all found strangled with their own bras, a haunting signature identical to the one from his earlier conviction. Despite the mounting evidence, Unterweger evaded suspicion for a while, using his fame and charisma to his advantage. Ironically, he was even working as a crime reporter, covering the very murders he was committing. In one instance, Unterweger was sent to Los Angeles by an Austrian magazine to report on how American police handled crimes against sex workers. While in LA, 3 women were killed in a manner strikingly similar to the European cases. Authorities eventually pieced the puzzle together. The timeline of the murders matched his travels exactly. Surveillance, DNA, and circumstantial evidence began to close in around him. Still, he denied everything and insisted he was being framed. By 1992, Austrian police finally arrested him. His trial was a media circus. He arrived in court wearing designer suits, giving confident interviews to the press, and continuing to proclaim his innocence. But the case against him was overwhelming. The prosecution presented evidence linking him to 11 murders in 3 different countries. Witnesses testified to his manipulative nature, and investigators demonstrated how he exploited his role as a journalist to gain access to crime scenes and police information. In 1994, Unterweger was found guilty of 9 murders and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict was delivered after an 8-hour deliberation. That same night, Jack Unterweger took his own love in his prison cell. He hung himself with the drawstring from his tracksuit pants, tying the loops exactly like he had on his victim's dot. It was a final act of control from a man who had lived his life manipulating everyone around him. The story of Jack Unterweger continues to haunt Austria and criminologists worldwide. He represents a rare and terrifying blend, a killer with literary talent, media presence, and social influence. His case exposed serious flaws in how the justice system evaluates rehabilitation, especially when celebrity and public opinion cloud judgment. He fooled psychologists, judges, and activists, but in the end, the truth caught up with him. Unterweger's life has since been the subject of documentaries, books, and films. His writings are now studied not for their artistic value, but for clues into his disturbed psyche. What makes his story even more unsettling is how normal and even successful he appeared to be. He gave lectures, attended parties with politicians, and dated actresses, all while committing brutal crimes in secret. Today, his case is used as a cautionary tale in criminal psychology and justice reform debates. Jack Unterweger was more than just a serial killer. He was a performer, a liar, and a master manipulator who weaponized charm to hide unimaginable darkness. His legacy forces us to ask a disturbing question: can anyone truly change, or are some performances too good to believe? Number 12. Tommy Lynn Sells, known in media as the coast-to-coast killer, is infamous for a life of drifting violence and shockingly little remorse. But to fully understand his story, we begin with his early life. He was born on June 28, 1964, in Oakland, California, into a family that quickly fractured under the weight of hardship. His twin sister died in infancy. and Tommy was left to grow up in a household marked by neglect, instability, and abuse. By the age of 10, he was regularly drinking and using drugs, a behavior that would continue throughout his life. From an early age, he found himself moving from one relative's home to another, rarely feeling stability or safety. School was no refuge. He struggled academically, dropped out before finishing middle school, and his behavior became increasingly unruly as he spent time with older kids on the streets. In adolescence, he began petty crimes, shoplifting, vandalism. These actions led to his first arrests, and as a teenager, he spent time in juvenile detention centers where he was diagnosed with conduct disorder. Despite these interventions, his behavior worsened. In his late teens, he started living a transient life, hopping freight trains, couch surfing, and drifting across states, working odd jobs, and often living day-to-day on petty earnings. During this time, there were rumors and reports of violent outbursts, but they were often dismissed or not connected to him. It seemed he was a ghost, visible one moment, gone the next. His life entered infamy in early 2000, when police in Del Rio, Texas were called after the disappearance of 13-year-old Katie Harris and her friend Crystal Searles. Crystal survived a brutal attack, and their story broke through the anonymity that had protected Searles for so long. He was arrested on January 29, 2000, in connection with the attack on the girls. The survivor's testimony proved pivotal. Crystal described him and their struggle in detail. Upon interrogation, Searles admitted to the murders of dozens of people across multiple states. He would later claim responsibility for over 70 murders, spanning back to the mid-1980s, although authorities were only able to confirm at least 22 based on physical evidence and witness accounts. His victims were often strangers: women, children, hitchhikers, motel guests, anyone vulnerable enough to be targeted in a moment of opportunity. After his arrest in Texas, Searles was linked to earlier killings dating back to at least 1985. In one case, a mother and child were killed in Missouri. In another, the car-fire death of a family in Illinois was tied to his confessions. He also admitted to crimes in New York, Nevada, Arizona, Florida, and Kentucky. His cross-country movement and lack of a consistent pattern made linking the cases difficult. A key factor in connecting him to at least one crime was Crystal Searles, whose survival and testimony led authorities to search for other victims. Psychological evaluations described Searles as suffering from borderline personality disorder, antisocial traits, dependency issues, and intermittent psychotic episodes. He reportedly experienced auditory hallucinations and believed in voices that compelled him, and cited deep shame, guilt, and self-hatred when reflecting on his past. His behavior in custody was often erratic and self-destructive. He would sometimes harm himself or threaten suicide. Despite this, he remained cognitively aware of his actions when speaking about them. In Del Rio, Searles pleaded guilty in federal and state courts to the 1999 abduction and murder of Kaylene Harris and the kidnapping and rape of Crystal Searles. Texas authorities sentenced him to death for Kaylene's murder and to life for Crystal's survival. This was followed by additional federal charges in connection with the 1997 murder of 9-year-old Mary Beatrice Perez in San Antonio. He entered a plea agreement and was given life without parole. He never went to trial for the other crimes he claimed to have committed. His execution by lethal injection took place on April 3, 2014, at Huntsville Unit, Texas. He declined to give a final statement. His final days were spent in intense scrutiny as media outlets covered the rare execution. His death closed one chapter, but sparked reflection. How did an individual like Sells stay hidden for so long? Afterward, law enforcement agencies reviewed the way transient offenders were monitored. The FBI and local jurisdictions began emphasizing data sharing and cross-state coordination. Sells' case highlighted the vulnerability of hitchhikers, homeless individuals, and those on the fringes, groups that often go unnoticed when they vanish. In criminal psychology, Sells is frequently cited as a case of wandering serial killer, someone whose crimes spread over many locations and years, making traditional profiling almost impossible. His ability to blend into different communities, from Texas to Missouri to Arizona, allowed him to avoid capture until his violent acts self-destructively left a survivor. Tommy Lynn Sells leaves behind a devastating legacy. Dozens of lives ended or changed forever, families left with questions, and a justice system forced to adapt to the realities of killers who don't stay in one place. His story reminds us that evil doesn't always announce itself. It can travel in silence, vanish into thin air, and reappear miles away with the same pattern of harm. Number 13. Alexander Pichushkin, often referred to as the chessboard killer, is one of Russia's most notorious serial murderers, whose case shocked the world due to both the number of victims and his chilling motivations. Born on April 9, 1974, in Mytishchi, a suburban district of Moscow, Pichushkin's early life gave few indications of the monster he would become. As a child, he was reportedly bright but withdrawn, struggling to socialize with peers. A traumatic head injury at the age of 4, after a fall from a swing, was believed by some neurologists to have affected his frontal cortex, which could later be linked to impulsive and aggressive behavior. After his father abandoned the family, young Alexander became more isolated. His grandfather, who was a major influence in his life, introduced him to chess, a game that Alexander took to with remarkable skill. He eventually became a strong player and would later use chess as a metaphor for his killings. However, after his grandfather's death, Pichushkin's emotional instability deepened. He was transferred to a school for children with learning disabilities, where he experienced bullying, which only fed his hatred and resentment. During his teen years, he began to drink heavily, often seen carrying bottles of vodka even during the day. His obsession with control and death began to surface more openly. It's believed that his first murder occurred in 1992, when he pushed a young schoolmate into a sewer after an argument. The boy died, but the incident was dismissed as an accident, and Pichushkin remained free. His true killing spree, however, began in earnest in 2001. Over the next 6 years, he would murder at least 48 people and claimed to have killed as many as 60. His goal, according to his own confession, was to kill one person for every square on a chessboard, 64 in total. His victims were often vulnerable individuals, homeless men, elderly people, or acquaintances he lured to Bitsa Park in Moscow. He would offer them vodka as a gesture of friendship. Once they were intoxicated or distracted, he would attack, usually by bludgeoning them with a hammer. In some cases, he would push the vodka bottle or sticks into their skulls post-mortem, a gruesome signature intended to ensure their death and mark the act as his. As his confidence grew, Pichushkin became bolder, even taunting police by leaving notes near the bodies. Despite the growing body count, he managed to avoid capture for years, largely due to the anonymity of his victims and the disorganized state of local policing at the time. But one mistake led to his downfall. In 2006, he murdered a co-worker named Marina Moskalyova. Unlike his other victims, Marina had told her son and left a note that she was going on a walk with Alexander. Her body was found in Bitsa Park, and her last known whereabouts quickly led police to Pichushkin. When they searched his home, they discovered a hidden chessboard with numbers marked on many of the squares, each number corresponding to a murder. During interrogation, Pichushkin confessed in detail to dozens of murders, recalling exact dates, methods, and motives. He spoke with pride, claiming that killing made him feel like God. He expressed no remorse and even lamented that his arrest stopped him from completing his chessboard. His statements were cold, calculated, and utterly devoid of emotion. In 2007, he was tried in one of the most publicized court cases in Russian history. Prosecutors charged him with 49 murders and 3 attempted murders. He was found guilty on all counts. The courtroom was stunned not only by the scale of his crimes, but also by his demeanor, calm, articulate, and eerily self-assured. He showed no emotion when the guilty verdict was read. The judge sentenced him to life in prison, with the first 15 years to be served in solitary confinement. Since his imprisonment, Pichushkin has continued to fascinate and disturb psychologists and criminologists. He is considered to have exhibited traits of both psychopathy and narcissistic personality disorder. Unlike many serial killers who act out of rage or trauma, Pichushkin claimed to have killed out of a desire to feel powerful and to outdo infamous Russian killer ANDREI CHIKATILO. He saw murder as a form of mastery and domination, turning it into a grotesque competition. In prison, he is known to be cooperative but remains unrepentant. His case led to renewed calls in Russia for better tracking of at-risk individuals and reforms in mental health intervention for troubled youth. His legacy is one of terror and manipulation, as he used charm and feigned kindness to lure people to their deaths. Alexander Pichushkin's name will forever be associated with one of the most chilling murder sprees in modern history. A man who viewed murder not just as a compulsion, but as a game to be perfected. Number 14. Fritz Haarmann, known as the Butcher of Hanover, remains one of Germany's most chilling historical criminals. Born on October 25, 1879, in Hanover, Germany, he grew up in a troubled household. His father was harsh and domineering, and young Fritz was often isolated. From early on, Haarmann showed signs of unusual behavior. He was shy, withdrawn, and had a strong attachment to his mother. Despite these struggles, he briefly served in the military, though his service ended due to reported mental health issues. Haarmann drifted into a life of petty crime, eventually becoming well known to local police. Over time, he developed a disturbing pattern of targeting young men and teenage boys. Between 1918 and 1924, he committed a series of horrific crimes in Hanover, luring victims with promises of work or shelter during the chaotic years following World War I. Many of his victims were runaways or homeless youths looking for help. Haarmann would invite them to his home, where their fates were sealed. He gained a reputation as someone who could help troubled boys, which made his trap all the more dangerous. What made the case even more shocking was that Haarmann worked as an unofficial police informant. He had built a strange trust with law enforcement, feeding them tips on criminals while hiding his own activities in plain sight. This access and apparent cooperation may have helped him avoid suspicion for years. When the disappearances of local youths increased, rumors began to spread. Eventually, in 1924, a breakthrough came when human remains were found floating in a local river. Authorities launched a major investigation that led directly to Haarmann. Upon arrest, he confessed to the crimes, calmly detailing how he had ended the lives of at least 24 boys, although investigators believed the real number could be much higher. HAARMANN's method of attack was particularly disturbing, and reports suggested that he often eliminated his victims in his small apartment before disposing of their remains in the river or other nearby areas. During his trial in December 1924, the courtroom was packed with journalists and horrified citizens. HAARMANN remained composed throughout the proceedings, even smiling at times. The trial revealed harrowing details that shocked the public and left a deep scar on German society. He claimed he felt compelled by urges he could not control and showed little remorse for his actions. His calm demeanor and matter-of-fact confessions made the entire ordeal more haunting. After only a few days of testimony, the court found him guilty of 24 murders. He was sentenced to death. On April 15, 1925, Fritz HAARMANN was executed by guillotine. Before his execution, he reportedly expressed relief, telling the guards he was glad it would be over soon. His case sparked national debates in Germany about how someone with such a disturbing history could operate undetected for so long, especially while working with the police. HAARMANN's crimes led to changes in how German authorities handled missing persons cases and how they monitored individuals with criminal backgrounds. The legacy of Fritz HAARMANN remains one of fear, sorrow, and lessons learned too late. His story serves as a grim reminder of how evil can exist under the most unsuspecting faces, and how trust, when misplaced, can have tragic consequences. To this day, criminologists and historians study the case of HAARMANN as one of the darkest chapters in early 20th century criminal history. Number 15. Charles Edmund Cullen, often referred to as the most prolific healthcare-related offender in American history, was born on February 22, 1960, in West Orange, New Jersey. His early life was filled with emotional hardship. He was the youngest of 8 siblings in a working-class family. Tragedy struck early when Cullen's father died when he was just a baby, and later, when he was a teenager, his mother was killed in a car accident. These events reportedly left a deep emotional scar. Struggling with loss and social isolation, Cullen attempted to join the U.S. Navy in the late 1970s. However, his time there was short-lived due to erratic behavior and a series of disciplinary issues that eventually led to his discharge. After leaving the military, Cullen turned to nursing, graduating from the Mountainside Hospital School of Nursing in 1986. He began working at hospitals across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. From the outside, Cullen appeared to be a quiet and competent caregiver, someone patients and colleagues assumed could be trusted. But behind his calm demeanor was a dark secret. Over the course of 16 years, Cullen used his position as a nurse to end the lives of dozens, possibly hundreds, of patients under his care. He administered lethal doses of medications such as digoxin and insulin, often to patients who were not in critical condition. What made the case so chilling was the unpredictability of his actions. Some victims were older and seriously ill, while others were expected to recover. Cullen later claimed that he believed he was relieving people of suffering, but most experts have strongly disputed this, citing the randomness and the sheer number of victims. Cullen's pattern was hard to detect at first. Hospitals often failed to investigate properly, and when concerns were raised, he would simply resign or be quietly let go, allowing him to move to another facility without a formal complaint. This cycle repeated for years. Each new hospital trusted his credentials and clean references, unknowingly giving him fresh access to vulnerable patients. It wasn't until 2003, while working at Somerset Medical Center in New Jersey, that his behavior finally raised enough alarms. Colleagues noticed strange spikes in patient deaths and unusual medication records tied to Cullen's shifts. A hospital executive alerted state authorities, and an investigation began. One nurse in particular, Amy Luckran, played a vital role. Suspicious of Cullen's actions and concerned for patient safety, she agreed to help law enforcement. Working secretly with police, she wore a wire and engaged in recorded conversations with Cullen, gently pressing him for information. These conversations eventually provided critical evidence. Cullen was arrested in December 2003. During questioning, he shocked investigators by calmly confessing to the deaths of at least 40 patients and hinted at many more. He claimed he had been trying to prevent suffering, yet many of the victims were not terminally ill. His confessions led to further investigations across numerous hospitals where he had worked. Medical records, staff testimonies, and medication logs revealed disturbing patterns. But because many of the deaths were not initially viewed as suspicious, exact numbers remain unclear. Some experts estimate his true victim count could exceed 400, making him one of the most lethal offenders in American history. In 2006, Cullen pleaded guilty to multiple counts of murder and attempted murder in both New Jersey and Pennsylvania. As part of a plea deal, he agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He was sentenced to multiple life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. Today, he is serving his sentence at the New Jersey State Prison in Trenton. Cullen's crimes sent shockwaves through the medical community and led to sweeping changes in hospital hiring practices, medication oversight, and patient safety regulations. His case exposed serious flaws in how healthcare institutions shared information, often prioritizing reputation over transparency. The fact that he was able to work in so many different hospitals, despite growing suspicions, remains one of the most troubling aspects of the case. His story was later adapted into books, documentaries, and dramatized films, including The Good Nurse, which highlighted the bravery of those who helped bring him to justice. Charles Cullen is not remembered merely for the horror of his actions, but for how easily he slipped through the cracks in a system that was supposed to protect its most vulnerable. His case continues to be studied in nursing schools, ethics courses, and criminal justice programs as a haunting lesson in accountability and the need for institutional reform. Number 16. Luis Alfredo Garavito, often labeled as one of the most dangerous serial offenders in history, was born on January 25, 1957, in Genova, Colombia. He grew up in a troubled home marked by poverty, neglect, and extreme abuse. His father was violent and often beat him, and young Luis reportedly suffered both physical and emotional trauma. The scars from his early life seemed to shape the dark path he would eventually follow. As a child, Garavito was quiet and socially withdrawn. He dropped out of school early and struggled with alcohol from a young age. In his teens and 20s, he drifted through various jobs, mostly as a street vendor or day laborer. Outwardly, he appeared to be just another struggling man in Colombia's poor neighborhoods. But inwardly, his thoughts were growing darker. Between the early 1990s and late 1990s, Garavito committed a horrifying string of crimes that shocked Colombia and the world. His victims were boys, usually between the age of 19 and 20, from poor or vulnerable backgrounds. He often posed as a priest, teacher, or government worker to gain their trust. Once he lured a boy away, he would take them to secluded rural areas where the crimes occurred. Authorities say Garavito used charm, gifts, or fake job offers to attract his victims, then carried out horrific acts. He often carried a backpack filled with items like candles, rope, razor blades, and religious symbols. Many of the crimes showed signs of ritualistic or symbolic behavior, and each scene was marked by extreme violence. What made the case even more chilling was the scale. Colombian police initially didn't realize they were dealing with a single individual. The crimes took place across multiple cities and towns, with different police departments handling each case. It wasn't until mass graves and consistent patterns emerged that investigators began to connect the dots. In 1997, the discovery of dozens of children's remains near the city of Pereira led authorities to suspect a serial offender. Clues left behind, including empty liquor bottles and glasses, worn-out clothing, and handwritten notes, helped investigators slowly build a profile. DNA and forensic analysis pointed to a single method and suspect type. But catching Garvito was no easy task. He was constantly moving and often changed his identity, using fake names and documents. It wasn't until 1999, when he was picked up for a minor offense, that police became suspicious. Fingerprints and DNA samples taken from him matched evidence at several crime scenes. During questioning, Garvito initially denied involvement, but once confronted with overwhelming proof, he began to confess. Shockingly, he admitted to the deaths of more than 100 boys and claimed the number could be even higher, possibly over 300. He described his methods in chilling detail, often without remorse, as if he believed he was guided by a force beyond himself. In court, Garvito's demeanor remained eerily calm. Psychological evaluations revealed a deeply disturbed mind, but he was deemed competent to stand trial. Due to Colombia's laws at the time, which did not allow for life sentences or the death penalty, Garvito received a sentence of 1,853 years in prison. However, under Colombian law, the maximum time anyone can serve is 40 years, and for good behavior, even that can be reduced. This sparked international outrage. The idea that a man responsible for so many horrific crimes could someday walk free alarmed human rights groups, journalists, and ordinary citizens around the globe. Public pressure led Colombian lawmakers to re-examine their criminal justice system, especially for cases involving extreme violence and crimes against children. In 2023, Colombian authorities confirmed that Garvito had died in prison due to health complications. He was 66 years old. His death brought a sense of closure to some, but many families of victims still carry the pain of their loss. His case remains a haunting example of how systemic poverty, childhood trauma, and legal loopholes can create a perfect storm for tragedy. Today, Luis Alfredo Garvito's crimes are taught in criminal psychology courses and law enforcement training programs worldwide. His case forced Colombia to face difficult questions about its justice system, its treatment of victims, and how society protects its most vulnerable. It also led to increased collaboration between regional police forces, changes in sentencing laws, and better tracking of offenders. Despite the horror he caused, his case ultimately reshaped how crimes against children are investigated and punished in Colombia. Luis Alfredo Garvito will forever be remembered not only for the damage he caused, but also for how his story forced a nation to rethink justice, prevention, and accountability.